All right. Good morning on the US West Coast, Thomas.
Good afternoon in Denmark.
Good to see you again. And yeah, you just sent off a big delegation back to Denmark after you have spent quite some prosperous days on the US West Coast. So, and that's obviously what you do. You help Danish businesses as well as I help Danish businesses and European businesses in general conquer transatlantic markets and marketplace in the US.
That's right.
Fantastic. All right. Today we are going to talk about something that is very dear to both of our hearts. And I had one comment on LinkedIn that said, nothing is more true, or how it was phrased about this whole concept of one United States and why it's almost never just can be perceived as one market.
Well, one of the interesting things, of course, is at the very outset, it's not physically one country, with Alaska and Hawaii being at some distance from the rest of the country. But that's not even the most important thing.
Exactly. And we have talked about the whole concept of United States not being one market in some of the previous calls we have had, and not to repeat ourselves too much. I think we will take a different approach this time on the one market the one market view on, or how Europeans and Danish businesses oftentimes view the US as one market. We talked a little bit about the statistics in a couple of different aspects, and for instance, when we were preparing for this call, we talked about some states in the United States, some local US states, does not even have, for instance, something about reuse of products on the agenda, and therefore not even record any statistics, whereas other parts where you're living in California go to lengths to actually be on the leading end of that. What is your view on that, Thomas?
Well, that's exactly right. And that's one of the things that we talk about a lot, where we say that it's not one market, because of course you could say like, well, yeah, but I don't really want to export to Alaska. There are not that many people there. Hawaii is not going to be that important a market for us, but the rest of it, it's huge. Yes, but it's not, I mean, to say that it's diverse is really, doesn't do it justice how different it in fact is. And of course, the delegation that was here focusing on environmental sustainability. And as you rightly point out, California really focuses on that, and even within California in several different ways. But we take often for granted in Europe that, well, environmental sustainability is important. But as you rightly point out, some states, they don't even measure it. And there's a saying, of course, in English, what gets measured gets done. And on that fine point, if you're not even measuring reuse of materials, well, it's fair to say that there are probably no incentives in place. There are probably no systems in place. In fact, I was just reading a statistic that said that with the Danish system for reuse of bottles for soft drinks, it was somewhere north of 94% of bottles that were actually recycled. And so the Danes who were just here, we were getting soft drinks and, bottled water, and they were looking at the water bottles, and these are these plastic water bottles. And so do these have the pent system, the system where you pay a deposit that has been in existence in Denmark for decades? Do these have the deposit system? Well, so there is a deposit system, but it's 5 cents. And most people not only find it to be not worth it to actually take the bottles back to anywhere where you could get the 5 cents, but don't bother. And it's not even about the 5 cents at that point, but they don't bother recycling them. So of course you're driving down the freeway and you see plastic bottles and soda bottles on the side of the road, and other things like that. And even with the system in California, which does have a deposit system, it's not significant enough. But
Go ahead.
But but the differences between states are dramatic, and you'll see on soda cans, you'll see it says California, Hawaii, New York, Maine, and I think maybe one or two other states that say that they have this deposit system, but the majority of states do not.
Exactly. And that is exactly what we are really surprised about when we start traveling in the United States. But on the other hand, I mean, you can also meet people in California where you live that does not know what is actually happening on the other side of the county, so to speak. So sometimes things like in the United States is really national, and then yet super local.
Yes. Yeah, and of course, we've discussed this before. Los Angeles County has 10 million people living there, and I live in the eastern part of the county. And I've had this discussion several times with people, and they ask me, "Where do you live?" I live in the city of Whittier, and some people are like, "Oh my God, I went to high school there, or college there, or a friend of mine lives there, or I was just there for some other reason." But a lot of people are like, "Well, where's that? Was that in Orange County?" No, it's not. And I have to go back and forth with them. And one guy said, "Well, if it's east of the 110, I don't know where it is." So the 110 freeway is this sort of this mid-city freeway that connects two other freeways. And it goes just on the west side of downtown. And this guy lives in Santa Monica on the far west side of the county. And he's like, basically anything east of downtown, he doesn't know where it is. And he really couldn't be bothered to know either because it's too far away.
That's right. And also what I have come, that's on a different angle, but traveling throughout the United States, I've come to realize, there's just a number of even as you go around your life as a regular consumer, there's just so many stores and so many different retailers that is predominant in some states and are completely unknown in other states. You would say that everything in the United States is national, but besides, I don't know, what can we mention? McDonald's, Walmart, and Starbucks, that may be the three brands that are really predominantly equally widespread out throughout all the 50 states, but anything else goes to retailer where you go about doing your business that is super local, or at least you can say limited to a number of states where this might be groceries, it might be other kinds of retailers, it might be law firms, it may be banks even that are. Maybe Bank of America is another example of something that is nationwide, but otherwise things are hyper regional in United States, or even local to just one or two states.
And to your point earlier about the regional differences, but also on this topic, there are also these cultural differences, and the cultural differences extend beyond. We're focused on environmental sustainability or not, but there's this chain of restaurants in the South. It's called Cracker Barrel, and it's famous throughout the South. But they serve food items that are really like very sort of classically Southern food that include biscuits and gravy, and which is interestingly for Europeans, it's pieces of bread that are covered with gravy that has like bacon and a bunch of other stuff in them. And it's reminiscent of some sort of like the older like peasant food things. No offense to peasants, but it's sort of like the old, like very hearty foods, which is still a popular item in the South and which you really can't get in California at all. They serve grits, they have a variety of other things, but they're popular throughout the South and they're fairly successful. And because the South is, broadly from Texas all the way to Florida, Kansas, Tennessee, other states across the South, that is such a large region that if you are, in fact, a restaurant and you're successful in that region alone, you're a really big restaurant chain. And yet in California, if people haven't traveled to the South, they would never have heard of this.
Oh, the guy that doesn't care about everything east of
yes, east of the 110, he would never have heard of Cracker Barrel. No.
But also that's again the compared to Europe. I mean, we also have a very different culture, different food throughout Europe. I mean, there's food you would not find. You find in Bulgaria that you would not find on the menu cards in Denmark, certainly. Besides the pizzas gets everywhere, but besides that, there are a lot of local foods that will not be found anywhere else in Europe besides the where it's originated. So that's basically what you, every time you try to find this one solution, this silver bullet for United States, and just think about how diverse we are in Europe, besides the language and the joint currency in United States and Europe is equally different when it comes to taste and preferences and so on, and especially the availability of various outlets for both your business purposes and also for your consumer purposes. So, but also the distance. I usually say the distance from the New England area up in Massachusetts and in that corner of United States and over to San Diego across the nation, that is equals the distance from the Arctic Circle and down to Ankara in Turkey.
Yes.
And,
yes,
and
exactly.
that's something that you would never expect in Europe, to be able to cover that ground with one type of sales channel, or with one distributor, or with one sort of solution for that massive amount of land coverage. So why you would expect that to happen in the United States is sometimes really confusing to me, but that's sometimes what is required from customers that are contacting. You probably have heard that as well. Can't you just find me one distributor? Yeah.
Oh, yes. Can you, well, or either can you just find me one distributor? And sort of the thinking is, we should just, it should be like, we should be able to do something that's easy here, because,
that's right.
Come on. But in terms of the distance also is, you're standing in front of the map of the US, and I don't recall if I've mentioned this before, but I had a client based in Bavaria, and they thought they were a tech company and they should be in Silicon Valley, but really they were targeting an industry that's in Kansas, which is sort of directly behind your head in the pink state there, in the big square, big rectangular state in the middle. And what finally convinced them was that I told them this would be the equivalent of opening an office in Oslo, knowing that your customers were in Madrid. They're like, well, we would never do that. So why are you doing it here? So, and that's one part of it. And one thing with these Danish companies who were here last week, they were staying at a hotel in Santa Monica, and we were on a bus driving to a conference downtown. And one guy asked, well, so where does this freeway lead? Because I see that it ends here in Santa Monica, Jacksonville, Florida. He's like, what? Seriously? How far is that? 2,850 miles. It's like, really? It goes all the way uninterruptedly? Yes, it does, all across the US.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And also we also talked about the whole, you can say, the metropolitan areas. In the United States, there are like 9 metropolitan areas with more than 5 million people, which means that's like 5, you can say, locations where you have the same population that is in Scandinavia, basically Denmark and Scandinavia, going up to 16 million people in a location like Los Angeles. And so that's also an interesting observation, because these metropolitan areas with these density, they have more in common between Texas and United States and Illinois, rather than the metropolitan area has with its own state in the rural areas. And that's oftentimes super interesting to observe, that you can say, if you need to find some similarities between your customer segments in rural areas and in urban areas, you need to look at the United States in an entirely different way. You can just not say you need to export to California, because you might have customers that have similarities throughout the metropolitan areas of a certain size, because they might have some some similar characteristics that you can actually benefit from. So that's also an observation you need to do.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that people who do political polling have come across fairly recently, kind of surprisingly that they haven't come across this before. They haven't really paid attention to this before, but of course the election in 2016 and the one in 2020 in particular, they really looked at this, where before they would talk about red states or blue states. And of course, interestingly, we use the colors in exactly the opposite way. So the blue states are actually the ones that are Democratic, which are the ones that we think of in the US, at least, that are more left-leaning. But we're talking about red and blue states because ultimately in a state, for the political system, it's sort of winner takes all. But then they started looking at, well, why did this state go in this direction and why did it go in that direction? And they started looking at the county level and even down to the polling stations. But what they really found was metropolitan counties and rural counties. That was where the big difference was. And sure, there might be in a rural county, which was predominantly Republican, there might be some polling stations that were slightly more Democratic, but that was really more of an anomaly. And so if you're thinking, well, I'm going to be exporting to California, or I'm going to be exported to New York, and you're not really exported to the whole state, your focus is going to be maybe the cities or maybe the rural areas, depending on what type of product you have.
Exactly. And that is super interesting in that whole context of I would say, forget about United States. And I think one of my blog post has also this headline: you're really not supposed to export to United States, basically, because that's sort of the provocative statement when I talk to companies. No, you're not exporting to United States. You need to figure out where you're going to export. Because also one of the things that European companies find surprising, and that was also even for some people in the United States, is surprising to find out that you have the 50 different flags in the United States. You have obviously stars and stripes, but that is merely in front of official buildings alongside with the state's national flags. So yeah,
that's right. The state's flag, the local county flag, and it's like, but there's certainly also, I mean, people are not without it's not without reason that people think like, well, I'm coming to the U.S. and it's the United States, because of course, from a federal level, the United States certainly presents sort of outward that it is that it's a united country, and that the president speaks for the entire country. And of course, it's something from, in the very least in the political realm, that has become increasingly clear in recent years, that politically the country is not united, and that there's a very broad diversity of thought. But the same thing holds true in business. And one of the things that I often think about is this American saying, how do you eat an elephant? Not that I encourage anyone to do that, of course, but it's interesting because it's this very large task, and the answer is one bite at a time. So as you're in Europe, you're a company and you're thinking, well, I want to approach the US market. You should think about, well, how much can I bite? How much can I chew and swallow in one bite? And where do I really want to start? Like, what part do I really want to start with? And it comes back to this idea that we've discussed before also about starting a journey. You have to start somewhere. And I think you were the one who was talking about someone who had spent a really long time driving somewhere. And it's a good way to get an idea of the size and scale, but also the internal differences that you don't see when you're just flying over.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you're arriving from Europe and you just like drop down with an airline in Chicago, and you spent your week there, or not going anywhere, it's difficult to understand the size of the country. But you're completely correct. I had a company once that were First, when they approached me, they had this say, can we find this one partner in the United States? And then okay, then they wanted to work on the northern states. Then they wanted to work on the obviously, as we went on with the business development, and then they increased themselves into to the New England area. And then for odd reasons, it was actually when we had the this volcano cloud over Europe back in 2009, I believe. The CEO was sort of stuck in the United States, and we were sort of figuring out how can you come to good use in this week that you're stuck in the United States. And we actually managed to get a whole lot of meetings scheduled for him in Georgia. And off it went. He went on in a rental car with a GPS, and when he came back on that Friday after being on the road with multiple meetings throughout Georgia, he was sort of like completely beat up when he came back to the trade council, and he said, you know what, maybe we should just actually focus on one state, because, and he said this should really be mandatory for any company going to the United States. Before you actually decide on where you want to start out with your business, you basically should go on a trip in a rental car with a string of meetings, because that's when you understand the size and the diversity of a state, let alone multiple states. And I also went on one of these week-long trips with multiple visits starting in Colorado, going to Missouri and Illinois and upstate New York, and ending in Washington, D.C. And multiple times the CEO asked me, so what time zone are we in right now? And he asked me to draw a map afterwards of where we have been and where we were driving and where we were flying. So you know, it's really a lesson to go to United States and drive through the country as you and have a force yourself with a strenuous itinerary of meetings to actually understand the size of the United States. So
yeah,
but I also assume that your guests were confused about time zones and the 9-hour time difference to California. That can be a challenge when you actually try to do a little work back in Denmark as well. So I assume they multiple times were late for meetings in Denmark and could not answer to emails right away, and so on and so forth. Wasn't that the case?
Yeah, it was definitely challenging, and we had a packed program. So often they would be sort of toward the end of the day before we went for dinner. Would be stuck with answering emails, and they would realize that no one was at the other end responding to their emails, because of course it was in the middle of the night in Denmark by the time they were answering emails at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah. And the same thing, you know, getting up early in the morning, just getting here. And of course they were here for a relatively short amount of time. They were here just under a week, and getting here, acclimating to a 9-hour time difference. I always recommend you get here in the morning and just you've got to just figure out a way to stay awake until like 9 o'clock at night and get a slightly longer night's sleep the first night, because if you end up falling asleep in the middle of the afternoon, if you're only going to be here for a week, that makes it really challenging for the rest of the week. But of course, figuring out on a more continuous basis, once you're actually here, once you have a base here, you know, we have this meeting once a month and it's at 4 p.m. in Denmark. It's 7 a.m. here. It shouldn't be such a big deal. At least I know a lot of people say like, oh no, you need to have an office on the East Coast. I certainly am one to believe that you need to be close to your customers, and the communication with your main office in Europe should be something that you and your main office should figure out, but you need to be close to your customers. And the fact that the continental US, the 48 states, has 4 time zones, you learn to figure this out very quickly. And I often do business with people in different parts of the country. Often they're on the East Coast, which makes it really easy because it's just a matter of adding 3. Sometimes I have to look up, it's like, well, I don't remember what time they're on now, and especially around the time when the time zone, or when the time change for daylight saving time, it's all states don't change at the same time, which makes it additionally difficult.
Yeah, I had the situation exactly yesterday. I was trying to schedule something and coming up with multiple suggestions for meetings, and one set of meetings were on one end of the time changing, and the other meetings were on the other, and that obviously also went completely wrong. So yeah, that is super difficult these 2 weeks where we are at least uneven. We're changing in Europe before you guys are changing, or the majority of US states are changing to back to standard times or daylight saving times. So yeah, so absolutely, that is can be a challenge. It's definitely something you need to factor in when you go about and setting up your business. You really need to understand how you are going to structure your home base back in Europe, and also your partners and your potentially your team in United States, taking these time zone differences into consideration. So it doesn't take like 2 weeks and forever to agree on something that goes by email, because the response time can be so endless long. So
yeah, exactly.
But another thing I was also thinking of is just also the concept. Now we talked about the metropolitan areas with the all these millions of people that lives in the United States, but also on the contrary, in the rural areas, I once heard something about a city is not really considered a city in the United States before you actually reach 55,000. I can't remember the context I heard about this, but it definitely shows. Just look over Denmark and see how many cities do you actually have over 55,000 citizens. Yeah. So obviously things are bigger in the United States, also in the rural areas, also in the parts of the United States outside the bigger metropolitan areas. So even though you are steering clear of some of the larger metropolitan areas, you might still have a significant customer base, even if you're in rural areas of the United States. So that is definitely something that you also need to take into consideration. You can actually narrow down to a very specific area and still have an abundance of customers available, depending on your business case, obviously, but that's definitely also possible.
And one of the things that's also relevant to know is that in the rural areas, there may be other business types, and those business types may be a sector that you do particularly well in. And I know the process industry, for instance, in processing foods, is typically located outside the larger metropolitan areas. And I was just reading about Tyson Foods, that is the largest processor of chicken in the US. They have 120,000 employees. Now, mind you, the context was vaccination, and they mandated vaccination by their employees. They have 120,000 employees located across the country. And, for a European company, 120,000 that's a large company, but they're located in a variety of different places where some of the plants may have several thousand employees. And just one of these plants would be a very nice customer to have. And of course, one of the things about trying to attack the entire US market at the same time would be to say, well, we're going to conquer this entire business with its 120,000 employees and all of their locations, plus all of the other ones. And if you look at what clients you have in your home country, and if you look at the size and scale and sort of think about the difficulty in getting to do business with a client, if you have another client that is has 5,000 employees spread around several facilities, and if you think about the process of getting that client onboarded, that might just be one of the Tyson facilities. And exactly. So attacking the entire United States makes it challenging for you as a company in many different regards. I mean, it's not just geography, it's not just cultural differences, it's not just travel times, but it's also the fact that some of the industries that you are targeting is, as in the case of the client I mentioned before, well, really that whole industry was centered around Wichita, Kansas, which is in the middle of the country, and they really wanted to be in a completely different location that they had chosen because of how they saw themselves, but the clients in the US were going to see them in a completely different light. And so you have to think of, you really have to think of what lens you're looking at the US through. And if you're looking at it through sort of this lens as it's the United States, I always think that you should look at it as the first lens should be, who are your clients? And of those clients, who are you going to start with in the US? Because you may say like, well, we're a German company, we're a Finnish company, we serve these 10 sectors. But if you're entering a brand new market that's this far away, that has some significant difficulties, you may want to choose 1 or 2 sectors. And within them, you definitely need to do your homework and say, well, there are a range of size of clients here, and look, as we've talked about before, look through your network, see who you know and who can help you get any sort of in or get any sort of connection with somebody at one of these clients. And sometimes it may be a little bit happenstance that you meet someone who knows someone, and that drives the decision to say, well, listen, we've found this one company who definitely wants to engage in conversation with us, and this looks very promising. And so you may start doing business in a location that's different from where you started, but you need to make those initial choices to say, we need to narrow this down to who are our customers and where are they?
Exactly. And also the fact that, you know, if you, for instance, have a new technology or need to do some influencing of local lawmakers, for instance, then you obviously also need to understand that you are facing 50 different countries, basically, with each their different interpretation of a regulation. Especially if you're working now, you say the food industry, Tyson is a food production, and if you're working in any regulated industry, you definitely need to view the United States at least as 50 different countries, if not 3,000, because you have 3,000 counties in the United States, a little bit more actually. And some regulations are actually down to the county level. So even within a state, you may face different challenges and different opportunities and different obstacles for your business. Obstacles and opportunities you need to explore through network and relationship building and lobbyism and more relationship building. And if you're too far away from where you actually have your key market, you need to understand also that the travel cost in the United States can be significantly. So the first question you obviously will receive from somebody who is going to do your business development or your sales or whatever we should call it, would ask you, so what is my expense account? Because that is the signal that you actually have made some consideration about how much are we actually willing to invest in building up this market. Because if you're located, like you say, in Silicon Valley, and you need every week to have somebody flying to Kansas to actually talk with local lawmakers, talk with the industry association, influence other key decision makers as to your, let's say, new technology that needs to replace an old way of doing things and solving problems, then you need to do that influencing over and over and over again until somebody says, yeah, we are okay doing a pilot with you. We want to help you actually navigate the regulatory framework so we can actually shortcut some of the red tape so we can actually have your not approved technology on a pilot in our area. We would do that with you, but that requires, you know, countless number of trips and lunches and dinners and meetings again and again. And that's obviously that has a cost. And some companies are surprised when they understand the cost structure of business travel over these massive amount of land in United States.
Yes, yes, yes. And just add to the list of costs, hotels and airfare and toll roads and parking, and the list goes on. It's I'm based in Los Angeles, and I know that a couple of guys from a French company went to their bank where they were working with a friend of mine. They went to complain about a $10 fee that they hadn't been warned about. But at the same time, they both drove in their separate cars to the bank downtown and parked in the building where the bank is located to complain about this $10 fee. And they spent $81 on parking, complaining about this $10 fee.
Yeah, penny wise,
and
pound
that's
foolish, but
yes. I mean, but they were so enraged about this fee that they really wanted to make their points. But in addition, the long long sell-in period where we make assumptions that, well, we all know that we need to be environmentally sustainable, and so everyone is going to think that we should be environmentally sustainable, and American companies, when we approach them and tell them that we have this technology that we're using in Europe, where we're clearly further ahead on environmental sustainability, well, they're just going to be like, well, this is great. We've been waiting for you guys to show up. Now let's get to work. And often, of course, that's just simply not the case, where you'll find, well, we need to run a pilot test because this is an unknown, an unproven technology. And European companies like, but it's not, because we've been using it for 20 years and this is just the newest version. And as it happens, this technology has never been used, maybe not in the US at all, but definitely not at this particular facility with this particular utility company, whether public or private. And the differences in doing business with a utility company, whether it is public or private, is definitely very different. So there are, the expense account and the patience and the planning that you need. And then at the same time, getting to that first client and getting that first order, getting the pilot project going. And then once you're there, you have that client. Now you've really opened a door where you could say, well, we did this pilot project. We're selling this product. Our products are being used in this location in the US, and you can take that to others and say, I know we've had these conversations with you, and I know you've had reluctance about our technology, but we've successfully deployed it in the US now. We'd like to talk to you about what that would look like here. And you were able to build on one success, which is another reason why I always recommend, finding out who your customers are and getting close to them and asking them direct questions. One thing that I often find with European companies is they're a little bit more reluctant, and they think Americans are extremely pushy. And so some European companies, at least, they stand around the edges of the dance floor, so to speak. And they wait, and they're like, well, we're over here if you want the product that we have to sell. If you want our solution, we're right here anytime, come by and we're ready. And you sort of have to adopt a little bit of this American, whatever you want to call the approach, but you have to adopt some of the American approach. And one thing I find, German companies, especially when they take over when they take over an American company, they're really good at identifying that perhaps the CEO, but definitely the salespeople, need to remain Americans, and they'll have their own chief financial officer because they want to be able to report back to Germany the way that they are accustomed to. But it's one of the things where neither of us certainly recommend that you find one person or one organization to attack the entire US at once. But but you need to focus more on, just hone in on maybe one or a few clients at the very outset.
Exactly. But and to sum up that whole spiel about that process, that was back to the you need to allocate funds to actually go and do these trips. Yes. And the further you stay away from that key entry point, the more expensive it obviously gets. So but and I think we're about to approach our end of our talk. We could go on forever about it, talking
for
about
a long time about this.
For a long time. So if somebody has a question here, then feel free to write us in the chat. And sort of you could say the final remark on this is the day somebody is approaching you and say, I can conquer the entire United States for you guys coming from Denmark, then that's time to be suspicious, because most likely that is not going to happen. But with all due respect I love working with Americans. It's one of the greatest pleasure I have had working in the United States with Americans. But we just need to understand they're coming from a different place, and the notion that one person with a limited sales staff would be able to cover the entire United States is just not existing. So please be aware.
If it sounds like it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah. Good. No questions have been raised so far. Let's see. Good. All right. I think that was sort of our...
We must have covered absolutely everything, which is great.
The entire United States. We've covered everything.
Yes, everything.
Yeah, super. Thomas, it was again a pleasure to talk with you, and we will, as always, send the recording to you guys, so you can re-record and revisit the recording if you should feel so inclined, and if you want to share with some of the people in your network, then feel free to do so. So awesome.
Always a pleasure talking to you and covering some of the topics that come up all the time.
Exactly. All right. You may have a great day in California, recovering from the Danish invasion.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great afternoon and evening.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.